Mr. Denton, thank you for being with us and taking our questions. First of all, what is the reason of your visit to Georgia?
Well, first of all, as a sign of solidarity with the business community of Georgia. As you know, COVID-19 has caused huge disruptions to the global business world, not only attacking individuals in terms of their health, but also their livelihoods. And I think it's really important that an organization like the International Chamber of Commerce, the world's largest and leading business organization, whose purpose is to enable business worldwide to secure peace, prosperity and opportunity for all, comes and visits the actual business communities.
Huge impact that COVID-19 has had on global trade. What are some of the main tendencies that are worrying ICC?
One of the cruelties of COVID-19 is that its economic impact hit the community before its health community. That happened particularly in developing communities. We saw, for example, the collapse of value chains around the garment sector within about 3 weeks of the close down in the US. But that impact was actually felt in Bangladesh, where you saw something like 1 million workers thrown out of their jobs. And that was before COVID-19's health impact hit them, because what happened was that when consumers were blocked from going to the shops, the whole supply chain was then affected, from consumers all the way through to producers, and all the way through to subcontractors, all the way through to SMEs, micro SMEs and individuals. And when I look at the Georgian economy, SMEs and micro SMEs dominate. You know, and you have very important sectors which rely upon the movement of people, like tourism. And so we've seen that collapse as well. So these are real stories.
What does ICC do in order to support regions, including Europe?
First job was to draw the attention of global policymakers to the G20, all these sorts of groups, that know the playbook that you use for the global financial crisis would not be sufficient for this real economies crisis. The key thing here was to get money to and actually support to SMEs and micro SMEs globally to enable them to keep functioning and keep employing people. So we created regional action groups. And what we do there is we crowd in all the voices of the business communities in those regions and identify what they need, and then we take it to the global policymakers, the regional policymakers and the leaders. We reorganise the whole of the ICC with a single focus, which is to enable business to get through this crisis. So I asked the court to look at everything. We have we have the largest independent arbitration courts in the world. And I asked them.
I have a question about that
I
later.
bet you do. But I asked the court to say, well, how can you help? What you'll see, and it's actually just come out again recently, that people tend in many economies to trust their business leaders more than their governments. And so if you want to distribute information that people will act upon, you actually need to distribute accurate information which can be utilised by those businesses for their workers, for them to have access to it as well.
Do you think this pandemic could be some kind of threat to, for example, like global trade or global connections? And do you think we will get more, more closed economies around the world?
Well,
Do you
there's
think
two things. There's
this pandemic has that strength?
Yeah, it's a good question. There's two aspects there. There's a practical aspect, just what's really happening now, and then there's, in a sense, a more philosophical aspect to it. But on a global basis, when you look at it, trade has collapsed by about 1/3, and to rebuild that trade is actually going to take a number of things, one of which is access to finance. There is actually a gap of between $3 to $5 trillion of liquidity which is required to actually enable trade finance to operate if you want trade to operate at the 2019 level. That's a huge gap.
Which
so
makes
we're working
country
on that now.
like me even more vulnerable.
Oh yeah,
right?
I think Georgia has real challenges. There's no doubt about it. But one thing, as I said before, I've been here before many years ago.
Yeah,
one thing that hasn't one thing that hasn't changed.
For the Australia Film Festival.
That's right. Yeah, I came here in 1986 to launch an Australian film festival, and we held it at the Rustaveli Theatre from memory, and we showed a film called The Man from Snowy River. So, and it was translated simultaneously, a Georgian man and a Georgian woman with microphones translated.
I can't
the
even
dialogue.
imagine
it was
that
amazing.
picture.
But look,
No.
but seriously, one of the question you raised, which is the philosophical question, it's a real downside risk for a recovery. If politicians take a view that it's in their interest in order to preserve power and to show strength and authority to their people, that the way of doing that is to close their borders and become more nationalistic, then the capacity for trade to keep flowing. And if you don't have trade flowing, then one of the key levers for global economic growth disappears. And that is a huge risk.
What gives tourists, for example, confidence to start traveling again?
It's a great question. I mean, if you look at global tourism, the collapse of global tourism has left 200 million people in the first 6 months of 2020 out of a job. We created, out of our innovation hub in Singapore, an application, an app, which is built on blockchain. It's digitally enabled, and it's effectively a digital rails. And if a government decides, and what we're suggesting and we have been arguing for some time, government should decide, is that you need to be able to determine your COVID-19 status before you leave for the travel. It should be pre-departure, not post-departure. So at Georgia Airport recently, when I arrived here, I'm actually not required to do a PCR test, but they didn't know. Because
you had to.
So I did one at the airport. That was after I arrived. Wouldn't it have been better if the government had determined that they used a standard like the ICC, we call the ICC AOK pass, and I would have had a blockchain-enabled digital certification attested to by a trusted service provider, a doctor who's been approved. It's then represented in a QR code on my phone, and I present that, and it's either tick green or red. And then I could pass through around Central America.
Georgia could be part of
We'd
this
love
network.
Georgia to be part of it. We would love Georgia to be part of it. What's really important is to have one standard, because in the end, what we're trying to do is instill global confidence again that the people who I'm traveling with on the plane are actually COVID-19 free as well.
Now back to you mentioning ICC arbitration court, and my question, what kind of impact did COVID-19 have on ICC arbitration court itself, and do you think of expanding its jurisdiction?
ICC, as you would expect, or you should hope, as a leading business organization, I had already introduced, when I took over at ICC about 18 months ago, a digital platform. So we were actually able to move quite quickly to regularize and normalize the utilization of virtual engagement. So we were able to create virtual hearings very, very quickly. The slowest people to adopt to that was not the court, it was actually the lawyers outside the court. Because as you know, many lawyers talk about technology, but are really technological dinosaurs. But we've helped them very quickly. So the actual functioning of the court has been unhindered by the operations of COVID-19. With Georgia and courts of arbitration, by the way, separately, I'm actually on the board of a number of very big investment funds, particularly, out of Australia. So I'm on the board of an investment fund that has about $160 billion worth of investments. We invest in infrastructure. One of the things that's really important to an investor is when you invest in a jurisdiction or an economy, that you have confidence that if there is a dispute, that you will be treated fairly in a transparent manner. Yes. That requires...
And timely.
And timely, but that requires a mature and developed judicial or legal system. One of the challenges we see, particularly with transitional economies and emerging economies, and economies that want more investment, is they don't fully understand how important that is. We have, as I understand it, we've had a look at how we will operate here. We're in the process at the moment of selecting a new president of the court. That will be resolved by the end of this calendar year. And we're actually doing a reset of the strategy of the court, so we will have a look. One of the obligations we have with the court, as we have with the ICC, is to enable business worldwide. And worldwide for me includes Georgia.
Thank you so much.
It's my pleasure.
For
Great to see you, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.